The Walking Together conference was held at Mary MacKillop Place, North Sydney, on the 30th and 31st of May 2025. Approximately 58 people registered to attend the Friday evening event and 65 were registered for the Saturday. Those registered included guest presenters, clergy, religious and lay people from across the country who came to reflect on and renew their commitment to the path of ecumenism and interreligious engagement. There were 15 dioceses and eparchies represented, and these included Adelaide, Ballarat, Bathurst, Brisbane, Broken Bay, Canberra-Goulburn, Chaldean, Hobart, Lismore, Maitland, Newcastle, Melbourne, the Melkites, Parramatta, Sandhurst and Sydney. Others present were from the Anglican Church, Sturt University, the National Council of Churches in Australia, the University of Queensland, the New South Wales Ecumenical Council, the Hindu Council of Australia, and St Andrew's Greek Orthodox Theological College. Nostra Aetate panel, 60 years of walking together. Presentations from representatives of the Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim and Jewish faith traditions. This is a workshop session which included a multi-faith panel session where representatives from the Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim and Jewish communities offered rich and respectful conversations on the enduring impact of Nostra Aetate. Each speaker contributed lived perspectives on the possibilities and challenges of dialogue, reinforcing the dignity of all people of faith and the shared desire for peace.
So, good afternoon, everybody. We've got to afternoon already. It's great to have you here. I hope the other workshop went well. In this workshop, we'll be looking at Nostra Aetate, and we have some guests, four wonderful guests. I just heard them in the other workshop speaking about their religious traditions. My name is Catherine Playust. I'm based in Melbourne, but I come from Sydney, so I grew up in this area, which is Camaragal country of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. We're thinking about Nostra Aetate 60 years on, and we already heard from Father Dan about the document this morning. So it's a document that, if you do your arithmetic, goes back to 1965. The Second Vatican Council ran from 62 to 65, so it's one of the later documents and one of the shorter documents too. I have the whole of it here, one page and the flip side, that's it. The print's pretty small, but even so. Declaration on the relation of the Church to non-Christian religions. It's a document that we heard mostly from Father Dan this morning about the earlier part of the document, which is talking about a lot of non-Christian religions in very broad and general terms. The later part of the document concentrates on Judaism. So we've got 41 sentences all up in Latin, 17 of those are for Judaism. And this really reflects a couple of things. One is the historic and ongoing importance of the relationship between Judaism and Christianity in terms of how Christianity started within Judaism. And the other is, of course, that the Shoah, the Holocaust, had been this horrific event which caused Christians, including Catholics, to rethink what we had been saying and thinking and doing to Jews. So there was this document and some other parts of the Vatican Council were opportunities for Christians, Catholics, to say, no, there are actually some major changes that we need to make in our teaching in this area. Vatican II was also a consciously global council, bishops from all around the world. So those bishops looking at one another would also have been reminded that they were dealing with a world that had huge diversity in all kinds of ways, including many different religions. So the document we ended up with was one that was talking about all religions besides Christianity, but was concentrating particularly on Judaism near the end of the document. Our speakers today come from 4 different religious traditions, as I said. You have the details about them in your program. And our first speaker is from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It's Venerable Dr. Alex Bruce. Alex, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Nostra Aetate didn't really say a lot about Buddhism, and there's probably some good reasons for that, which we can talk about later over lunch. However, Christianity was not new to Buddhism. By the time that Jesus Christ walked the earth, Buddhism was half a millennia old. By the time of the Council of Nicaea, it was approaching 800 years in existence. In itself, Buddhism went through a number of councils, but it never split along the sorts of theological, Christological lines that prompted the questions to be resolved by early ecumenical councils. And there are a number of reasons for that as well. Early Christian missionaries did go into Buddhist countries. Of course, we had Matteo Ricci and Francis Xavier going into India, and the others going to Japan. The persecution of Christians in Japan. We also had remarkable Jesuit Ippolito Desideri going into Tibet in the 18th century, and he spent 3 years or 4 years in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, studying with the great lamas and learning the language and really founding the what would later become this notion of comparative theology, where you immerse yourself in the text, the languages, and the experience of the other in order to bring back into your own tradition insights from that other. Nostra Aetate, generally speaking, mentions Buddhism only very briefly, and the language that it uses doesn't reflect the specifics of Buddhism. It's really been left to development since 1965 for the implications to be brought out. Those developments since 1965 have not always been helpful, but they have been positive. They have some positive outcomes. So, for example, we have the Day of Prayer in Assisi, the Assisi Day of Prayer. Initially in 1986, His Holiness Pope John Paul II and the Dalai Lama from Tibet attended that. Since that time, the approach to Buddhist-Catholic relations has been somewhat reserved, and I think sometimes with a little bit of good reason, once you understand the purposes and reasons behind it. So in 1989, for example, we have this letter to the Christian bishops on certain aspects of Christian meditation, where the Vatican felt the need to clarify this notion of meditation in the Eastern sense, to make sure it's Christocentric rather than sort of this diffuse Buddhist sort of thing. 2003, you had Jesus Christ, the bearer of the water of life, the document that came out that talked about Christianity in the New Age. Buddhism was mentioned 4 times, and unfortunately, sort of several of its principles were referred to as New Age sort of principles there, which bemused a lot of us. We've been around longer than you, and we kind of know what we're talking about in that sort of sense anyway. Pope John Paul II, when he, in 1994, I think it was, published Crossing the Threshold of Hope, sparked a bit of a firestorm in Buddhism when he sort of made certain well-meant, well-intentioned references to Buddhist philosophy, but he talked about it in the language of Christian eschatology, in Christian soteriology, which have no parallel in the Buddhist philosophical worldview, Buddhist metaphysic. And so when His Holiness talked about Buddhism being a negative soteriology, well, these words don't make any sense to a Buddhist, but instead what they heard in some parts of Southeast Asia were that Buddhism is a very negative sort of world-denying kind of religion, and it set off some protests. And this, of course, was reflected a lack of understanding by the Buddhists on the language and the terminology that's used by the Catholic Church in that context. And this leads me to some further reflection on where interreligious dialogue can really assist in this notion of understanding each other's languages and concepts. One of the most significant pastoral phenomena that I've noticed over the last 15 years is the growth in Western people of all ages expressing this notion that they can be both Buddhist or Christian, Buddhist and Jewish, Buddhist and that, Buddhist. There's this notion of dual belonging. I'm both. both Buddhist and Christian. And when you start to ask them, why do you say that? What's behind it? They sort of start talking about this, they pick up a bit of that, bit of this, bit of this, bit of this, and they sort of blend it all together. And you actually find out, well, you're actually not Buddhist, you're not Christian, you're actually something else altogether that you've made up in yourself. But one of the reasons for this very well-intentioned and very, very well meant phenomena is that the Buddhists don't understand the Christian theology or the Christian notions and language and what it all means, but the Catholic theologians or the Christian theologians, by and large, don't understand the Buddhist philosophy, the Buddhist context. You do have people who are very well-meaning and try, who say, okay, well, we can talk about God as emptiness, emptiness as God, and so they then try to draw parallels between the Heart Sutra and kenotic theology, but of course it means nothing. It's not it doesn't what it mean at all. And so what I think would be quite helpful moving into the future and building on Nostra Aetate would, I think, be two or three things. Number one, I think it would be really good if Catholic universities or Christian universities in their programs of theology, in their programs of theological study, would be to actually have someone who is trained in Buddhist philosophy to say, okay, and who has some more than passing knowledge of Christian theology with the language, with the texts, to say, hey, this is how you should think about and perhaps navigate this intersection between these two traditions. I think also it would be really good in seminary formation for future priests, sort of based on those four pillars of Pastor Adobo Vobis. One of the dimensions could be this interfaith dimension, where they're now going out into an increasingly pluralistic interfaith world. They need to have this systematic exposure to this sort of interreligious context. I think there is much room to be hopeful going into the future. Buddhism is a philosophy that clearly speaks to a lot of people of a certain age. There is something that happens in people's lives at a certain stage where they start thinking, oh, gee, I heard about this in Buddhism or something. It's one of the faster growing philosophies or religions in the West. However, it's still very young in the West, and this is also both a challenge and a benefit. Buddhism in the West is pretty much in the same position that the Christian church was in the first centuries. The first generation of Western Buddhist monastics, of which I'm one, I've been a monk for 22 years, the first generation of Western Buddhist monastics is still alive. So we're still very young. We still meet in houses, house churches, similar sort of things you see in the Acts of the Apostles. So Buddhism in the West is still very young, and it's still going through this process of adaptation and process of navigation, or navigating the Christian tradition, principally Christian tradition, into which it fits. And that's sometimes an experiment that yields wonderful synergies, or to use that kind of word, but it also reveals fault lines, it also reveals misunderstandings, that it takes a lot of humility and a lot of patience to sort of overcome. I think there is a enormously... so what time? 8. Okay. She's a very keen timekeeper, which is really good. There's also a political dimension to ongoing Catholic Church relations with Buddhism that can't really be ignored either. The Vatican Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue focuses its principal conversation with Southeast Asian Buddhists in sort of Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Thailand, those sort of regions. They don't so much focus on the northern Mahayana Buddhist traditions, and there may be political reasons for that. Nevertheless, the Mahayana tradition is the one that a lot of people seem to be being quite attracted to, and some dialogue with all of that, I think, should be encouraged. Just as the Catholic Church managed to subsume and transfigure, if I can use that word, Aristotelian and Platonic Neoplatonism, I think I would not be surprised if going into the future, into centuries' time, people who do become trained across these multiple traditions will then start to appropriate Madhyamaka philosophy, the Buddhist Madhyamaka philosophy, and which has some resonances at a deeper level with the sort of metaphysics of John's Gospel, for example. I think it's possible that, like say Thomas Aquinas and his appropriation and transformation of Aristotelian philosophy. It may be that some Christian scholar in the future may well look at Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and the Madhyamaka philosophy and say, hey, we can transform that. We can use it in service of explaining and presenting the Christian faith to others without necessarily denying or denigrating the benefits and positivity that Buddhism has to offer. So I think, by way of conclusion, sure, this Nostra Aetate was a tentative foray into Buddhist-Christian relations, but it was a really good tentative foray. And the initiatives that have evolved since speak really well for the future if they're followed through. It's good. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex. Our next speaker is Dr. Ron Hoenig of the Jewish tradition.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've written 3 pages of this, but I'll try and do it without the text as much. I'm the son of Hungarian Jewish refugee parents. Like lots of Australian Jews, I never had grandparents because both sets of grandparents were killed in the Holocaust, as were 4 of my mother's siblings. And they lived through, and I'm saying that the experiences they went through were driven by the Nazis, but there was the theology of contempt that Nostra Aetate was set up to combat. Surviving the Holocaust or being related to the blood of that legacy creates a deep fear and anxiety in us, and I think that echoes through the generations, first, second and third generations. I'm not an observant Jew, but I think I embrace a distinction between Christians and Jews in that as I can be a not very observant Jew and still be a Jew. I can not be a believing Jew necessarily and still be a Jew. And for many people in Australia, that sense of being a Jew includes a connection to a land and a people of Israel. So in our household, there were no symbols of Judaism. My parents didn't have them around. They educated me in culture and ethics and integrity, but it came through my dad's communism when he was a communist. And neither was there much Zionism in our house. My parents were just really happy to be in Australia, and they felt that they'd escaped anti-Semitism. And they were much more grateful to be in Australia than I was. I was much more critical about Australia than they were. So Nostra Aetate marked a seismic shift in the Catholic Church's relationship with Judaism. We were no longer the people who had killed Christ. And if Jews had in fact killed Christ, then the Jews who lived in Melbourne in the 20th century weren't among them. And so we weren't collectively responsible. And then, so the Nostra Aetate established shared celebrations and commemorations. Like I go to every year to a commemoration initiated by the Catholic Church in Adelaide of a commemoration of the Holocaust. And there are educational programs between Catholics and Jews and that attempt to dismantle prejudices. And we've worked together on a range of social justice issues, especially on refugees, on First Nations people, on anti-Semitism and forms of ethno-religious discrimination. The ACBC's document, Walking Together, directly confronts the resurgence of anti-Semitism and urges Catholics to combat anti-Jewish rhetoric. And these actions demonstrate that the Declaration is not merely a historical artefact, but a living commitment. I have some criticisms. While Nostra Aetate was undeniably transformative, it's important to acknowledge that it didn't do much about supersessionism, for example, which came up later. And challenges remain. It's important to point out that while the theological scholars are aware of the implications of Nostra Aetate, I don't know how much those beliefs and thoughts and ideas have permeated into the pews. And there have been critics within the Jewish community of some of the aspects, for example, of de-Judaizing Christ. And though we acknowledge the importance of social justice elements of liberation theology, there is a tension there, and the challenges remain between us. There are moments when misunderstandings or insensitivities within interfaith dialogues create the necessity for us to actually talk candidly to one another. For example, the diaspora Jewish reactions to Pope Francis's statements on Gaza were divided. We honoured his legacy as a friend to the Jewish people and a champion of interfaith relations, but many others were troubled by public criticisms of Israel and what they saw as a failure to grasp the existential threats that Jews felt after October 7th that relate to that Holocaust background. We all feel the pain of Gaza. We feel the pain of the Christians who are defending Christians within the Holy Land. We feel the pain of the Muslims who have families in Gaza, and we feel the pain of Jewish people who lived through October the 7th and are waiting for the hostages to be returned. Jewish community is far from monolithic. There's a great deal of diversity within our community. Sometimes we don't express it because it's felt that we need to keep the community together to create solidarity. The opinions range from the expulsionist views of the extreme right in Israel to a liberal position that acknowledges that Palestinians have a right to land in the Holy Land, and yet Israel has a right to exist and is a Jewish and it should be a Jewish and democratic state. And there are also on the left-wing positions that are anti-Zionist and pro-Palestinian, viewing Israel as a state that's fundamentally rooted in dispossession of and oppression of Palestinians. And these are only the extremes and the middle of that. And then there are others who are seeking dialogue between Palestinians and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis. And that's really very significant and very important. As they say, there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians, and they have to share that land. So my observation is that Catholic people acknowledge the anti-Semitism of previous iterations of its theology, but they don't see why, to their Jewish friends, their genuine horror at what's going on in Gaza can appear like a manifestation of a lack of care and understanding of Jewish pain. But the important task that the Church can help Jews with is to disconnect the various narratives of political conflict in Israel-Palestine from the narrative of Judeophobia that was implicit in Catholicism before Nostra Aetate. Yes, the Netanyahu government needs to be criticised, maybe reviled, but it's Christians who can help us to ensure that if you criticise Israel, you're not criticising all the Jews in Sydney or in Melbourne, neither as a group nor as individuals. We all have lots of different opinions on that. As we look to the future, we build on the legacy of Nostra Aetate. Strengthening interfaith education is crucial, but I do have some problems with the notion that schools are going to change the problems of intolerance between different religious communities. It's not for us to put this on kids. It's our problem. We need to deal with it. And we need to deal with it by talking with each other, having debates and discussions and dialogue, actually understanding each other and sharing, rather than saying, oh, there's a curriculum solution to this. There isn't a curriculum solution to this. But there is a real necessity for us to create a climate in which we can share an understanding of each other, of each other's customs and traditions, of each other's faith, and of each other's divinity as human beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Our next speaker is Associate Professor Derya Iner.
Assalamualaikum, peace be with you, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, Camaragical people of your nation, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Let me see if I can use this. No, not that. Okay. So we will talk about from Nostra Aetate until today. Obviously, there is a context to it. It was 60 years ago in response to Holocaust, devastating experience of Jews, and also growing awareness about the religious pluralization or kind of diversity. And 60 years after this document, what we see is, yes, there is hyper diversity. We are more connected, but in the meantime, we are more divided than ever. So this is bringing a lot of pressure on us to revisit the document, but also try to understand it in this context, in the new context. And for Muslims, because it is addressing Islam as well, I will try to address these matters from Muslims' perspective. And especially, I will try to highlight the experience of Muslims since 9/11, when there was, I think, a big vibrance in dialogue with Christians, especially Catholics. In the first parts of the document, there is address to the role of religions, and we believe the same. Yes, science addresses how question, but religion addresses why question. It is giving a purpose and meaning to our lives, and also bringing a compass to navigate our lives meaningfully, ethically, and in dignity. Looking at the Abrahamic religions, I think shared experience, it is very common. For example, next week it will be Eid al-Adha for Muslims, when the God asked Abraham to slaughter his son Ishmael. According to our tradition, he tested Abraham, his commitment, his faith. This is the same story, but with the other son, Isaac. To me, it doesn't make a big difference at the end of the day. The story is same, the commitment, faith, and dedication, and the challenges in the face of suffering, and the spiritual growth coming after that is the same. Very much like the story of Mary. And although Muslims see, as mentioned in the document Nostra Aetate, Jesus as a prophet, the prophet concept is very unique, different than Christianity as well. We need to really give a context. Prophets are sinless, they have miracles. So again, that's another theological different discussion. But what I want to highlight here is, I always feel like, as a person committed to dialogue for more than 25 years now, and living with a Christian lady, like 24/7, sharing my house with her for about 3 years, who I call as my spiritual sister, soul sister. And again, after 9/11, going to, especially the first 10 years, going to church more than mosques, I think it just really gave me understanding of Christianity, and I can see differences. We can't, shy away. They are there, but we are walking on the same road. When it comes to the roundabout, we take different exits. That is really leading us to different directions maybe, but we are mostly walking on the same road. That's why religions are very important for us to be the unifying forces. And for all religions as well, because they're all trying to foster accountability to their God and to themselves, so which is bringing, I think, very moral, ethical life, regardless of our desires and advantages sometimes. So within this, I think, collective action, having this dialogue with religions of all people is very important. I will focus especially how the Catholic, I think, contribution speaks volumes, going further, going more than I think declaration, especially after 9/11, we saw the freezing political environment where United States declared war on terror. Muslims in the West, including Australia, were seen as a threat, and an invasion to Afghanistan and Iraq. And still, since then, Islamophobia is a big threat for Muslims in the West. But again, these dialogues really had a soothing effect. So people started to understand each other better than before. They started to communicate and show support for each other. And in turn of this, Muslims had a common word declaration signed by 138 Muslim scholars in response to a verse from the Quran. It says, "O people of the book, let us come to a common word between us." So this common word really fostered the idea of working together to address social injustices, discrimination. And again, this is taken seriously by academic people and theologians as well. We had, for example, John Esposito, Todd Green. They are very much rooted in their Catholic tradition, but also writing and leading the area in Islamophobia studies. And also Jordan Defnar Dinari, she also had the Christian Handbook of Understanding is what Christians should know and do about anti-Muslim discrimination, and she dedicated a few chapters to Christian theology, Catholic theology, and luckily we saw similar kind of support within Australia. Too many things happened after Christchurch, after some attacks, and we found always religious leaders in humility and sincerity, I think, leading their people. That was quite, I think, powerful. And we also need to acknowledge that sometimes religion is used by exclusivist people. For example, Brenton Tarrant, he declared in his manifesto that churches are empty, but mosques are full. So there was also that kind of address to Christianity for him and problematizing Muslims' presence in Australia and in the West. So we are seeing a world more connected but more divided. And after the 7th of October, I think that was another, hard milestone for Muslims after 9/11. This time, I think it was beyond the control. Again, it was beyond the control of Muslims, and a lot of people died. This is 601 day, and now 60,000 people died. And we need to also acknowledge that this is bringing grief, hostages and the families of hostages, but also 60,000 people died in hunger and very inhumane conditions as well. These need to be also acknowledged. So this is an issue overseas, but again affecting Muslims and Jews here. And we see a spike in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And again, if you take it as a source of division, let's take it. But if you take it as a shared experience, that's also doable. Muslims, after the Christchurch, looking at the last 4 years, for example, when we looked at the 200 mosques, so we surveyed them, we found for 58% of the mosques were attacked in the last 4 years. Again, now synagogues going through attacks. I think the two communities can understand each other to fix the problem, or they can start competing their vulnerabilities to exacerbate the problem. Again, this is our choice and call, and I think that's why it's very important to address the problem, see the similarities, and start conversation, because otherwise it is really kicking the misconceptions and hostility. We need to also understand that Muslims are grappling. They need to understand, they are like in frozen mode. They're trying to protest, and they're trying to also find ways to kind of protest in a civic way. And understanding their trauma, I think engagement with them will be really helpful. They should at least feel like someone or a group of people are feeling their grief and they're ready to offer a hand. And that's going to start a really healthy conversation. And again, leaders played really good roles in doing so. I know it may be quite confronting for the Jewish community, but again, talking to children from Gaza every night and understanding, living that I think catastrophe they are going, I think very much helped by religious leaders like Francis Pope and Pope Leo. Again, this is not very much limited to Muslims. We see them showing the same, I think, compassion and love for Ukrainian people, for people, they mentioned hostages as well, but also the conflict in between now India and Pakistan they're addressing. And also in this case, it was Korean people, when they had a Sewell Perry tragedy 10 years ago, he was carrying a ribbon more than a half day just to show the symbol of support. And someone said, it's better to take that off. You should be neutral. But he said, but listen, where human suffering is involved, you can't be neutral. So this is our religious or human side kicking in to connect, understand. Again, coming to the criticism about schools, now we are trying to start a project knowing that I'm very much involved into interfaith, and I know that relationships are quite frozen. People don't know what to do, how to do, simply because we are still in that trauma mode. So we thought if we can start working with a younger cohort who are not very much kind of exposed into these discussions, if we start addressing a common problem, and this common problem for adults can be housing problem, but for young people and parents, it is digital media. If we start bringing, kind of leveraging this interfaith and intrafaith, because we want to include Shia Sunni schools and different church schools, and bring them together to address a common problem that is very far, far away from political, social climate, and we can make them work, not just one of Iftar or one of Harmony Day, but like 2 years of kind of project they're doing together that can teach them to start seeing one another beyond the idea post on the screen. So that way we really want to kind of start this talking skills to talk with each other and work each other and start seeing each other more than their thoughts, their beliefs, and their traditions. So this is just a very non-politicized project, but again, the background is really working with faith schools and also extend it to public schools later, because I know as a parent, digital media and its harms is a problem for everyone. Let's discuss it, and if you're interested, maybe if you know any schools, you can reach out to me. But again, it can be another problem for other people's, let's say, it can be housing problem, it can be aging problem, or it can be environment, but at the end of the day, find something common and work together around that common things. And later on, you can always find time to discuss these sensitive issues once there is a kind of trust developed. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Derya. And speaker from the Hindu tradition is Shri Surinder Jain. Thank you.
Normally, I'm not that. Normally, I don't drop my things on the floor. This document is 60 years old, or young, as Dan told us. 60 years ago, there were very few Hindus in Australia. There were some Hindus who fought in World War I on behalf of Australia. We came in significant numbers only during last 25 years or so. So I'll talk about our relationship during this period and give a scorecard as well. Hindus know more about Catholics than Catholics know about Hindus. And the reason for that is Hindus learn it directly from Catholic teachers, where Catholics learn about Hinduism through books, through media, mostly by non-Hindus. So I'll try to correct some of that today as to some basic points about Hinduism, which you will appreciate. Contrary to everything you have heard, Hindus believe in one God. We have various names for that God, but a very common name in all scriptures is Brahman. To remember it, it's very similar to Abraham if you take the A out. Brahman is the ultimate, we use so many names to describe the ultimate reality, God, all-powerful, etc. Brahman creates the world, runs the world, and then binds the world unto him. And in these three roles, we use three different names for Brahman. Vishnu, the one who runs the world, Brahma, who creates the world, and Shiva, who winds the world back. The attributes of Brahman are unlimited. As human beings, we cannot fully comprehend it. We look at the God based on our narrow set of desires as to what we want from God. If I'm a student, I want God to provide me facilities to receive wisdom and teachings being given to me. In that role of God, we call God Saraswati. If I'm a soldier who's going to fight a battle which requires me to kill, I'll worship God in the form of Kali, a ferocious form to destroy evil. We have thousands of such names for God, for different attributes or for different things through which we can relate to God given our present set of needs. Apart from names which come from language, we also have icons. You must have seen, if you go to a Hindu temple, some statues. These are icons which show us in a non-linguistic way what aspect of God we are talking about. Hinduism believes that there are many paths to God. The aim is to be one with God. And how do we do it? it depends on our temperament. As they say, it's horses for courses. There's a path of devotion, there's a path of action, there is a path of service, and so on. Depending on your temperament, what suits you, what inspires you, you can take that path. We also have a concept of dharma, which is translated into English incorrectly as religion. Dharma is one's duty, and faith is probably a much closer translation than religion. Since we accept many paths, and each path has their own scripture, where the name of the God may be different, what you have to do may be a different path than in the other books, but they're all acceptable as reaching the same God. That's why when Jews came to India more than 2,000 years ago as traders and settled in the backwaters of Kerala, they were accepted as one more group. They have their own book, they have their own name for God, and their own way of worshipping. Similarly, when Zoroastrians came to India as refugees, they were accepted and they're thriving in India today. So diversity is inbuilt into Hinduism. Because of that, Hindus do not have a conversion process. No matter which path you're on, you'll be encouraged to continue on that path. The only time you want to change your path is if you think this path is not for me, then you pick up any of the other paths and take that. We also have a concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the whole world is one family, and different members of the family are following different paths. Because we have so many different sects, we don't have a single hierarchy. We have had many rishis. Prophet would not be a correct translation of that, but these rishis have experienced God, and then they have explained to people, this is the path I took, you can also take this path. And there are many such rishis in Hinduism. I haven't counted, but I think roughly 50 to 100 years, we have one more rishi. Coming to the present day, in Australia, the main interaction between Catholics and Hindus happens at two levels. One is here, as interfaith leaders, we come together, we try to develop understanding of each other, and we see how to keep harmony in the society. I have met Kate many times for that. The other type of interaction or intersection between Hindus and Catholics is through the Catholic schooling system. Hindus love to send their children to Catholic schools. You'll be surprised. The reason? Because Catholics know how to run good schools. Schools which produce children who are disciplined and are very good academically, both the things that Hindus want in their children. The scorecard of Catholic schools where Hindu children are studying, we haven't had any problems. There have been a few cases, one in Western Australia, one in Victoria, where out of ignorance, the school asked a child to remove what was a religious icon. But in every case, when we spoke to the school and explained it, they were very happy to amend their policies and allow that. So you get A+. Thank you.